Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
This is episode 10 of this year's Oscars series, and the Academy Awards are right around the corner, so we're in the home stretch. Today, we're talking about film editing, and last year's panel is back for another go. Christopher Angel, you're a triple threat writer, director, editor. You've been editing for over 25 years, and your credits include James Cameron's Expedition Bismarck and Gary Shandling's The Making of the Larry Sanders Show. Welcome back.
Thanks, Skid. And hello, Amy. It's great to be back.
Hello.
Getting a little ahead of me there. Amy Duddleston, you're a film editor with more than 30 years in the industry, and your credits include Mare of Easttown, Gus Van Sant's Psycho, and The First Omen. Glad you could make it again.
Thank you for having me, as always. It's great to see you guys.
We're asking listeners this season to join us for a moment and consider the devastation of the LA wildfires. Although the fires are contained, the city as a whole is still facing challenges that will stretch into the foreseeable future. To all of our industry colleagues and everyone affected, we see you.
Indeed.
Okay, let's discuss some movies. The 2024 nominees for film editing are Anora, The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Pérez, and Wicked. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. Last note, I'm going to recognize the nominated editors by name, but apologies in advance if I mispronounce any. Team, you need to correct me if I mangle the names of your colleagues. First up, Anora, edited by director Sean Baker.
Wow.
Yes.
I'm going to start like an overall comment for me. This is Chris. I actually have to say, I watched a lot of these movies near kind of the end of this time. It's just been busy. I've been writing a novel and just been very focused on writing. And so I knew I wanted to do this podcast, was excited to be here, but I really did watch a lot of them at the last minute. And
Same.
yeah, it allowed me to kind of think about it in a different way, which is I really focused, or I thought I was going to focus on like what has the director and the writer given the editor, and what has the editor done with it? So it's like I'm going to look at it really technically, look at it from the editor's point of view. And then I started,
and then
and
you
I
saw
think,
Anora.
yes, which is edited by the writer and the director, and it just blew the whole thing out of the water.
Oh.
So I'll dive in quickly with my opinion. I think for a director editing their own material, like Sean Baker did a great job. Like it's a very entertaining movie. It generally moved well. I liked the way things were structured. Like clearly he's a good editor. And also just a little background on how these movies even get here. They're nominated by the editors section of the Academy, and then the entire Academy votes on them for the award. But I think the good news for us is that any of these movies that are being nominated in the editing category have gone through being looked at really closely by the editors. And so they're all going to be really good. And I think probably Nora had like a higher bar maybe to pass because, as an editor, I'm aware that the director edited their own material and sort of the pitfalls of that and not being as objective as you want. But I really did enjoy it. I do have some critiques of it, of course. I felt like in the end, like it just felt a little light. And I think for me, part of it was like how much time was spent on what I call the first half of the movie. And so we're getting to spoiler alerts. But the first half of the movie is really this sort of like Disney princess fairy tale, sort of this exotic dancer and this son of an old Russian oligarch falling in love. And it took up a lot of the movie for me because I kind of got the idea of it. And I kind of got the sense that their relationship wasn't that deep. But I was looking at the runtime, it took a lot of the movie. And then the second half I thought was actually really interesting. It got very funny and there was sort of collision of the worlds and the reality came. But personally, I just felt like there was something off of the pacing, the rhythm. And again, it's like one of those places that I wonder if another editor had worked with him, if they would have been able to have that conversation. All right, Amy wants to say something. I'm going to pass it to her.
I have to say something. No, I feel very strongly, very the same way. It's like, for me, it's when you have like comedy and drama, you have to balance it. And it was like scenes just played out. They didn't like they went to their end. It's like that whole scene where the guys come and like she gets tied up and like it just went on. And it was really funny. It was very funny. And like him running like the whole thing. But like the scenes just kept going. And it's like there was no like cut to the dramatic thing. Like there has to be a balance, and I feel like he missed the boat on that. That was where an editor could have said, looky, It's like when you have a dramedy, there has to be equal. And like when you said at the end, it's like it just felt light. It's because there wasn't like it didn't meet the sum of its parts, you know, like all of the pieces didn't end up in the same place. And it's like I enjoyed that movie. I mean, I liked it. Director wise, like there wasn't like one shitty performance in that movie, like not one. And he did a tremendous job, like with the whole, like everything, like the way it was directed. But the editing, it's like it didn't quite make it for me. Like scenes just played too long. And like it was like another movie that could have been 20 minutes shorter, you know, and very compactly told the story. And you would have felt like the same things by the end, and it would have been stronger. And that, like, you know, I think that's, you know, you're saying the same thing too. It's just
Yeah, exactly.
It's
like it has so
like
much
the director's
potential.
in love with his material. It's like
Exactly.
the writer director is in love with everything, and it is really hard to like no. But this is an editing thing. This is like an editor thing, where you're trying to like end a scene to get to the next thing, and he didn't get that. You know, he's like an excellent filmmaker. Like his other movies are so interesting, and this was just as interesting. But I do feel like it just fell off kind of with that job, you know?
Exactly. And I can talk to that as a sort of multi-hyphenate. You know, I've directed
Yeah.
features and I've edited other people's features and documentaries. And it's really hard. I mean, when I've directed, I've always worked with other editors. I mean, I've directed 5 features. And I mean, technically I could edit my feature,
Yeah.
but exactly what you talk about, it's so hard. You have to divorce yourself about what happened on set. I think it's important probably to try to,
So
yeah.
many things.
Right. You remember that like you were running behind and it was stressful and there's things that like sort of influence your opinion of material that may not be the same as an editor who has distance to it. And again, with the script, I mean, like we talked about some past years, like,
Yeah.
I'm also a writer and I really believe that editors have such an important role to play in storytelling and some of the stuff that we consider script writing, like structuring scenes, structuring the whole movie. And to have a little bit of distance from the screenplay is really helpful. It's like, oh, that's just not working as well as it could be. Or as you pointed out, like, boy, that's going on a little too long. We could get out of that scene more quickly or structure that scene a little differently. But when you've written the script, directed it, and now you're editing, you just don't have that arrow in your quiver. You don't have it, So
Yeah.
again, this is fun. It works. It's a good movie. It's well done. It's just I think we feel that it could have been a little better if you maybe collaborated with somebody else.
From experience, yes, exactly. It's just like the scene where like the tow truck is there and you're just like, oh, come on. You know, yes, it's one more thing, but like it just kept going. And it's like you wanted them to get on the road. You wanted them to start, in the diner when he's chastising the Gen Z kids. It's like you didn't need that. You needed to cut to the script. It's like
Hmm.
just build it up more. You're getting closer
Exactly.
to finding him.
Exactly.
You're like putting on the brakes.
Exactly. Exactly. I totally agree. There's one thing I do want to point out that I really loved, and this was really fun to see was kind of the overlapping voices, the overlapping dialogue. We're sort of taught in a traditional Hollywood sense not to do that too much, like to try to shoot everything separately and then
Yeah.
maybe overlap stuff afterwards. But he had the camera rolling, he had people yelling at each other and over each other. And he did it a couple times. And that was actually really, to me, really powerful and fun to see editorially because you're like, oh, is that going to work? Can I get a sense of what's going on in the scene? And it did. And that stuff did propel the movie forward for me.
No, it did. Like when those guys just don't stop talking, like they just never shut up. And it's like, and then she's like screaming and like, that was so good. And I get you fall in love with that kind of thing, but like,
But let me ask you guys, because this is one of my favorite films of the year. But the critique that you guys are bringing up, and then obviously trusting your perspective, that resonates with me. And I can see why the editing could have been at another level. But you guys talked about a couple of things that did work and were surprising.
oh yeah,
But now I'm surprised, though, that the movie did get past the editor selection process. If anything, I would think that editors would have it set an even higher bar for, oh, what's this director? Why didn't he have an editor? It's as far as selecting for the nomination. And so were those couple of things that you talked about or the overlapping dialogue or some other things that worked well enough to really put this into the top tier of editing this year? Or again, so it's I guess I'm trying to square this circle
Yes.
a little bit, and I appreciate you guys saying some more about it, about what you really liked that makes it top tier, or again, how you think things get mitigated. Not trying to pick for the Oscars or challenge the movie, but I'm curious.
No, I mean, it's like I'm a member of the Academy, and I actually did not nominate this movie for best editing. But so many people enjoyed it, and I will like sometimes just go on like my sense of enjoyment of a film. It's like, it's like my nominees were very different than like, the ones that actually got nominated. And that's usually how it is. It's like, you know, um, but that's kind of how it happens. That's how, it's like maybe I have an issue, but I'm also just thinking in like my editor head. And also, it was a weird year for movies. I mean, it really was. And so there was some slim pickings. It's like there weren't like a lot of films that like people truly enjoyed in terms of, and we'll talk about Emilia Perez later. It's like I have like, massive issues with that film. So I, and I'm just scratching my head like, like how anything. But anyway, that's later. But no, your enjoyment kind of carries like your experience in the theater, and if you had a good time, then by all means, it's like if you learned something about strip clubs and sons of Russian oligarchs in Brighton Beach.
And
I mean,
yeah.
it's yeah.
It's true. I totally agree with Amy. And Skid, I think it gets back to my earlier point of like my, my attempted project here of like, oh, I'm gonna look at these really technically and like see what the editor's been given by the director or the writer. But Amy's totally right. I found myself even even the first movie, I could not divorce myself with the emotional experience you have
Yeah.
in the theater watching the movie. And it's just natural. And so what I found myself doing is like, okay, I enjoyed the movie. And then I go look at the editing and say, well, why did I enjoy it? So it's really it comes from that way, and I think that's true for any of us. We are audience members as well as craftspeople, and at the end of the day, there's the subjective. Like that movie worked for me on this level, and this one was fun. It was a screwball comedy in a way that I haven't seen made recently, and so that was interesting and fun to watch. And so you're like, okay, that worked. It was funny.
Yeah.
So why did it work? And I could point to some editing reasons why. At the end of the day, would I give it the Oscar this category? No. And for some of the reasons we talked about. So that's to me the shading here is like probably deserves a nomination. And I agree with Amy. It's like it was not a kind of a great year overall. It's kind of very uneven. So definitely it stood out as like a movie that worked, was very well thought out, and totally deserves a nomination. But
Yeah.
again, I'm not going to give it my vote for the Oscar. Not that I get one.
Well, I'm very curious to hear what you guys thought worked or didn't work with our next film, and that would be The Brutalist, film editor David Jenkso.
David Jenkso. I liked this movie a lot. I really did. I was put off by the runtime at first because we don't all have 3.5 hours to devote to the cinema in a day. And it was hard. I mean, just getting time to go see it was hard. Anyway, but once I started watching it, I was very surprised at how I needed to know what was going to happen next. It's like there were very long parts, and I do feel like this is a movie that like no frame was left on the cutting room floor. It was like everything was there. But I mean, Adrian Brody, like the guy can do no wrong for me. I love him so much, and so just that and the setting and the story, I was completely taken into the whole thing. There was some weird editing. There was some really beautiful editing in parts of it. And I was just kind of swept up with the whole thing. And I really, I do feel like it could have been shorter. Like this story could have been distilled into a more concise package. But that being said, I mean, I was still there for all of it. And it was just really cool. I mean, there were some really cool things in it. And Adrian Brody was just phenomenal, you know.
Yeah, Amy and I talk about this every year. I think about runtime and how, as editors, we're like, okay, how could you tell that same story
Yeah.
more quickly and shorter? And so when I'd heard that, okay, it's 3.5 hours and it has an intermission, they had a countdown and it was 15 minutes and it was good. I got to stretch my legs. I kind of needed it. And that, boy, So I was dreading it. I kind of was saying as you, I was like, boy, I'm having a hard time like scheduling myself to go see this movie. I got a lot of other duties to do, and it's also about this architect coming out of the Holocaust. I just like this is going to be a hard movie to watch. It's so long, and yet, I mean, I'm with you. Like from that first opening sequence, it really captured me, and I was totally surprised because
Yeah.
I almost always say movies are too long. We say that every year.
Yeah, we do. We say it every year. I say it every week. I'm just like,
And this
ah.
seemed like the most egregious one,
Yes.
but I think there were two aspects, both from a technical editing point of view. There were some really, really interesting things tried in here. They were using every technique they could come up with
Every
to
technique.
tell the story.
Like the little video at the end, they
Yeah,
used all those
yeah,
Abbott Buddy like dissolves. I was like, oh my
everything.
God, the wipes.
I
It was
know.
fantastic.
It really was. And then it also just emotionally, as you point out, like I was hooked. Like I felt the sense of dread from the beginning. I was like, oh, what terrible thing is going to happen to him? And bad things did happen to him and his wife, but not necessarily what I expected.
Yeah.
So it did work. And it made me think. And I think, like looking at the movies this year, as I mentioned when the Nora was a little slight, I felt like this movie was really trying to do something interesting and sort of
Hmm.
talk to some deeper aspects of humanity, right? About trauma and how we respond to trauma. And yeah, it was trying to say something. And I really appreciated that. And I could see it might not work for everybody because of the length and sort of the material, but it did for me. And because it was attempting to say these things, I really was very interested to see how they did it editorially. Again, I didn't feel like it was over long. I guess the intermission helped. I could sort of stretch my legs. I think we also live in this time of streaming, right? So I'm kind of used to like taking a break and coming back to material, and that made sense somehow
Yeah.
in our current
No, and
world.
the way, he organized it into the pieces, it played well to that, because you're just like, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly. Exactly.
what's part
And
two?
weirdly, like
It's like,
yeah. I actually, and what was the
yeah,
weirdest things I got out of the movie is like, oh, I kind of wanted more time spent on the relationship between Adrian Brody and his wife, Elizabeth,
yeah,
the main two characters, because she comes in only in the second half. And so
yeah.
she doesn't get as developed or doesn't have as much time to
And
see
she
their
was such an
relationship.
interesting character,
Yeah, I thought so.
like so, and
So
like for all of their trauma of being apart and where they were, and and then they just like get right back into like their thing of their dynamic. And it was
exactly.
really interesting. And you did kind of want a little
I
bit
wanted a
more.
little
Like,
bit more
what
of
was
their
their
private
dynamic
life.
before?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. So that's interesting. It's like I want even more. Like it's not that like
I
I
know.
had time for that. Let's talk about some of the editing techniques they used because there was some interesting stuff done in here. Like there was a lot of long takes, right? So it was a little different than maybe all the other movies because it wasn't
Yeah.
close up wide shots like a traditional Hollywood style movie. To me, it's more European.
Yes.
But I noticed like there was that one scene. I'll start diving into some specific scenes here, but the Italian stonemason, he was walking ahead of them and something happened with his voice in the
His
sink. And I was like,
voice.
was it supposed to be like an
I
echo or was it just psychological?
loved that.
Yeah, how did that work? Because like again,
I
it was
loved
wrong
it.
technically on some level. Like it was out of sync. Like never would you make it, but it totally worked.
It was like some like weird accident that happened in the Avid. I
Yeah,
was like, there's always those weird things that happen, and you're like, was that an accident? Like, did the track get ahead? But it was so cool.
it
And
was
those were the
really
things that I
yeah.
really appreciated. Like,
Me too.
you're breaking this thing up that it could be just a very traditional, like whatever, but it was not. And those are the things that really got me. Like that whole, like going into the pit of marble and
Yeah.
the cave and yeah. And then he's like slowly pouring the water. And it was so cool.
Yeah, or like the train crash, just another one that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah.
It was a
They're like,
high,
we're
like
watching this
helicopter.
train. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a little red at the end. It's like a high shot. We're in a helicopter. You've got all the steam from the train coming up, and then so it's just feels like it's an
Yeah.
image. And then at the end, there's a red flash. It's like, what was that? And then you
Yeah.
find out there's an accident.
Yeah.
So rather than being close up in the accident, seeing people hurt, you kind of see the reaction of other people, and you kind of see it from, God's point of view. It just changed
No,
everything.
and it's like before that, it was like they're loading the stuff on the train, and that it's going to the building, and
Mhm.
and then like suddenly it is not going to the building, and yeah, it was telling the story without,
Exactly.
yeah,
And then they also did some stuff with like putting newsreels and dialogue and debates over other montages, which again,
which got a little distracting in parts,
yeah, the film school
but
technique that we've
yeah,
studied, but I thought it was fun. I thought it was an interesting way to try to tell the story and do more with less, right? It was like, okay, how do you give it historical context,
Oh,
but
in
stick with these
Pennsylvania
characters?
and the steel
Yeah.
and like all of that. And you're like, yeah, it's this is the Industrial Revolution-ish,
Hmm.
post that, the 1950s and building America.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So for me, it's just, yeah, that
there was a lot in that
a lot
movie.
of things
Yeah,
and just an editing. Like there was just a lot of thought and care and trying different editing things. And I've got to appreciate that.
I
That's,
did too.
yeah.
I know. My kid who's 19 really liked it. Like
Oh,
was
good.
kind
That's
of
good to
dreading
hear.
the amount of time. I was like, no, my attention was completely, I never got bored.
Oh, good. That's great to hear.
Well, this is shaping up to be an interesting year because I did not like this film.
Mm,
It wasn't just the length and it wasn't just the subject matter, but for me, you talk about the interactions of the characters and such, but I didn't think there were any characters in the entire film. I mean, I think they're all caricatures. I think
Hmm.
the wife is a caricature. I think the industrialist is a caricature, and they're all ideas. And again, the ideas of industrialization and how we treat immigrants and things, ideas I'm happy to engage in on
sure.
filmmaking, but I didn't think if all you're going to do is very broad brushstrokes of these ideas that are anthropomorphized, if you will, you just don't need this much time to do it. Like, I think the themes that he's dealing with could have been much simpler. And I think this is a very director self-indulgent film. And when you guys talk about how editors can kind of bring characters together and decisions you make to kind of reveal a character that's not necessarily right in the script, again, because we've talked about that in past years. Um, the things I don't disagree with what you say you like about the film, but I'm very surprised that you're not more critical of, I don't know, just all of this, like how much is actually being said over this 3.5 hours.
Right. No, and I do feel like it was very self-indulgent. Like Brady Corbett is not Paul Thomas Anderson. And it's like he was trying very hard in places to be that person. And, and it's like, but then again, it was just like I was just kind of swept up with like the drama of it. And but yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying because it was long. That's
Yes.
self-indulgent. It's
Yeah.
like that is, I see an hour coming out of that movie. It's like I can see, yeah, but mm,
Yeah, and I guess again, I just saw a lot of themes layered on top of each other. So for
yeah,
me, it wasn't so simple. Like I was sort of surprised by sometimes sort of the depth that I was seeing in it and taking away from it. And I guess it also spoke to me personally. But there's obviously there's trauma and like how do human beings respond to trauma. But then there's also this guy who's a great artist. He's got a gift, but
yeah,
he's a flawed human being. And we don't get to see the flawed human beings as much as I would like in a lot of these movies. So then you're like, okay, as an audience member, what's my sort of feeling towards him? Somebody's got a gift, but he's got some issues. And then there's the drug addiction, which I know like sometimes that might seem cliche, but to me it kind of worked. He was an addicted personality in general, whether it was alcohol or drugs. And then his wife shows up and their relationship. I saw a lot of themes and there's old world and new world. There's anti-Semitism, there's fear of the others, there's like what do rich industrialists want? I mean, I thought that Guy Pearce character is actually really interesting because he was more intellectual than you might expect, but he still had that like aspect of like I just I want to make money, I want to make things.
yeah.
And so I saw a lot of themes coming out of the characters. I kind of agree with you that like I think the personal lives of Toth, the main architect, and his wife, as I mentioned before, were kind of missing a little bit. And I think that might be what you're getting at. It's like, boy, there's a lot of time spent, and there was something missing there, and I can see that. But again, like compared to the other movies for me, it's like, boy, it was really trying, and it's as you could tell, it spoke to me on a lot of different levels.
The movie starts with like this letter and like, they were separated and when, how we will see each other and and then it's like the first thing he gets is a blowjob. It's like, what do you do with
From a
that
prostitute.
$25
Yeah.
from a prostitute?
Yeah.
So it's like,
It's like, wow, who
okay,
is this
lovely
guy?
talk. Who
Yeah.
are you? You
Yeah.
know,
$25, burn a hole in my pocket.
burn a hole in my pocket. Yeah, but the whole of it, I was pleasantly compelled.
Yeah, I've got to applaud it for making me think and like
Yeah,
and using film. I mean, us for us editing technique
film
to that point.
techniques. Yes,
Yeah.
techniques.
Yeah, and I did enjoy the performances. Like, I mean, I looked at Guy Pearce's character. I was like, oh, that's an interesting like take on this character. And I thought Toth as well. So, that was again, some of this is very subjective, but I enjoyed the performances. So I was able to kind of just roll with it. But I could see if you're not enjoying those performances, you're feeling it's forced somehow. But boy, that's a long movie. That's the danger. It's
No,
a
it's like
risk,
he,
right?
Guy Pearce gets cartoony in parts.
Yeah.
It's like the wife got cartoony. It's like the son, like, yes. So I see Skid's point.
I mean, I think the cartoony aspects. It's not to take anything from the actors. I feel like they just didn't have that much to work with on that. But
Right.
you guys have also got me, looking at it from a different angle as well. So, hey, that's why we do these.
That's why we do this.
Great. Yes.
Let's see what we have to say about the third movie on our list, Conclave, edited by Nick Emerson.
Nick Emerson.
It's interesting. Like, so Conclave, one thing I like to look at is just the runtime of these movies, right? Like, we talked about this a lot already, but Conclave, funnily enough, was the shortest movie of all the ones that were nominated this year. It was 2 hours.
And I hoped it was longer. I kind of wanted
Yeah.
it to be longer.
I know. I kind of did too. I mean, the good news, I think, as I may have mentioned before, is like any of these movies that are nominated have gotten through the editors, and they're all well edited. Like, there's
Yeah.
nothing, certainly this year, there's nothing here that isn't really well done. And this was a very impeccably edited movie. And what it did do editorially, I thought was fantastic, was create tension and drama out of what's basically like a closed room of cardinals. Like, if you told me that, I was like, how on earth are they going to do this? And yet, I'm going to tip my hat to Nick. Like, I think he really managed to
Oh, yeah.
understand how to make tension work in that realm and do it. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I don't know, I couldn't get around feeling like this maybe could have been a play. It's a closed kind of world on purpose. That's just the nature of the story, right? They're locked away there to vote on the next pope. But at the end of the day, too, like I just feel like the editing, like it did the best it could to kind of get us out of that claustrophobia. But at times, like it just felt like it was moving forward because that's where we were. We were stuck, and you had to like kind of do these chess moves. So it didn't like blow me away. It's like, oh, this is great new technique. It took in a great way. It took what was given to it, and they did a great job of making it work.
Yeah. It was a classically told story.
Exactly.
No, I really enjoyed this movie. My wife did not, but you can put anything that skews the Catholic Church in front of me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm here for it. So, so to me, she wanted like more pomp, and I was like, yeah, maybe a little more pomp. But like, I thought it was like every time they went to the fireplace, like to burn the things, it's like, oh, this is so interesting to me. Like the repetition of like that's kind of how they built the tension was with the repetition and the votes and the thing and and then like the whispers in between and there's and it was fascinating because it's like that's my favorite thing is just like a room filled with people who can't agree on anything. And so to me, I was like, my cup runneth over. And Ray Fiennes was amazing. Like everybody in it was so great. The twist at the end was kind of like I saw it coming.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I won't like spoil that. I just saw that coming. But I enjoyed it. It was really well done.
Yeah.
And I did wish it was a little bit longer. Like I don't know why. Maybe like after the conclave, like because Ray Fiennes, it's like he says he didn't want to do it and he didn't want this and he didn't want to be the Pope and then he kind of wanted to be the Pope, but he didn't. And it's
If I point to like the editing choices, particularly as you mentioned, Amy, those like the voting, right? It was like repetitious
yeah.
section where they would do the same kind of vote over and over again. But the editor was making some really good choices there to like show more of it the first time and then pick sort of dramatic moments and little moments in subsequent ones. So we knew what was happening and then kind of push the story along. I think one thing it's funny when you think about the editing category specifically and what we're talking about here. I was having a little bit of hard time pulling out because I was looking at it with this in mind, but pulling out like what is the contribution of the editor? What's the script? What's the director? And like how do I value those things in this movie? Enjoying it and seeing that this is a really good movie, but I kind of had a hard time saying like, here is the editor's contribution as opposed to like, oh, maybe that was storyboarded or scripted out or the actors are doing it.
Right.
And so it makes it a little harder for me to say like this is the one that deserves an Oscar for editing because it's not as flashy, I guess, in that sense. And that's
no,
good.
it's not
I think that's the
flashy.
right choice for the movie. Just
Yeah. It
Yeah,
was not flashy because
not at all.
it's not a flashy story. And it's like,
Hmm.
and it's like they all come, they're dressed the same. It's like, you know,
Hmm.
it's very tricky. So, but then like the lunchroom drama, like, it's just those are the things that were so interesting to me. It's just like served by quiet nuns,
Exactly.
Isabella Rossellini, who had like two lines of dialogue, but she took her job very seriously. I did enjoy it. I just thought it was like it just flowed.
Hmm.
I was never bored.
Yeah, I was glad to see it. Glad to see it nominated in this category. I
Yeah.
think well deserved for that. But yeah, it didn't quite blow me away enough from an editorial point of view to. And as you say, like I felt like maybe something was missing. I'm not sure what more you could have done, but definitely wanted a little bit more somewhere, technique or
Something.
something. Yeah.
Something you said, Amy, gave me a thought, and I'm curious if you guys think editing contributed to the specific factor, but I also think it's a skewering of the Catholic Church. But one of the strengths of the film for me is that it's not a screed. In other words, like,
No.
yes, every cardinal that gets their comeuppance, I think in some ways represents some sin of the Catholic Church, and that's sort of playing through, but it's never. I can see this movie being edited in a way that emphasizes those things with a much more obvious intent
Yeah.
as far as let's point out these issues rather than just sort of letting them unfold. And I think, again, I think it is a skewering. It has an agenda, but I didn't feel like the agenda was on its sleeve. And I mean, do you want to give that credit to the editing? Is that one of the strengths of it? Or do you think there's just larger issues with this that
I do feel like maybe they held back a bit, but I don't know. I don't know the story. Was it a book? I was it a book? I don't know. It was just enough.
It gets to my point where it's like it was really hard for me to pull apart. Like again, what's the director's
Yeah.
contribution? What's the writer's contribution? What's the editor's contribution? It was really hard to kind of pull those apart. I mean, in a good way, they're obviously working together to the same end, but I couldn't say like, oh yeah, the editor made that work in the movie. I mean, for me, it was like it was structured around Ray Fiennes' character's point of view, and that's what kept it balanced. I would say, like on a critique point of view, I feel like the Italian candidate, the conservative candidate, was a bit of a cardboard character. Like,
He was
I don't
kind of,
know.
yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't totally succeed for me on that level of like not being kind of strident. Like
No,
that's where
there's
it started
always
to
somebody
wear
who
it.
wants to keep them in the Middle Ages and
You expect it and it was there.
you
So
expect it, and here he is.
yeah,
And the Palace Intrigue with John Lithgow and all of
exactly.
that. It's just like, yeah, it's of course.
Yeah.
all right, we'll move on to the fourth film on our list, Emilia Perez, edited by Juliet Welfling.
Um, I did not finish this movie,
Wow.
and I feel really bad about that.
I think you take a stand on the right side of that. But let's talk about the editing.
Yeah.
Started out interesting, and then it just was not. I just modern musicals are hard. They are. We expect a certain thing, and it just didn't deliver on any. These people, there. I don't know. There was just too much happening with all of the characters, and I didn't like the performances, and yeah, I couldn't finish it. And it wasn't Juliet Wilfling's. It wasn't her fault.
Exactly. Again, what is the director giving you? What is the writer giving you? What do you do with it? It's my mantra of the year. I mean, I feel like the movie's biggest weakness was its biggest strength. It wasn't realistic. It was a fable. For the editor, that's kind of fun to do. Like, oh, I'm going to do these musical sequences that
Sure.
break reality. But at the end of the day, I personally didn't feel like the characters were real, like at all. Like, my gosh, it felt not real. And I didn't get into the psychology of these characters, and some of it didn't make sense to me. So it was kind of like disappointing because I felt like Juliet was doing a great job with these musical sequences and using different techniques. Like it was a musical, but it certainly wasn't a standard musical,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like the editing contributed to that in a great way. But at the end of the day, again, to what end? Like it didn't really stick with me very long. And it's because I didn't feel like the characters were real people.
No, and the story just was like, sadly, I didn't care. It could have been like the politics and the thing, it was interesting. It was an interesting idea, but I just feel like not a musical. Like I just
Yeah.
and I, it just and the characters, I just and the you know
Yeah. Why was it a musical? I mean, I found myself like halfway through, I'm like, why is this a musical?
why is this a musical?
It's interesting and
Yeah.
like it's being well done, but not sure why. And like, what is it saying? Like, the only thing I could come up with is like, oh, they didn't want it to be realistic. Like, it's a fable of some kind.
No, I
But
get
I
it. It's
didn't,
like it's a
yeah,
fable, but so is the substance, and like
right, exactly.
which is like a much more like it was not a great movie, but it was an interesting movie. But like it's like it was just much more. Yeah. Anyway.
Let me talk about some things I did like about the movie though,
Okay.
like some of the individual sequences where I thought Juliette Welfing did a great job. Like the there's this sort of gala dinner sequence, and I thought the editing there was fantastic because it kind of stopped and started, and I'm sure some of that was from the directors, like the people at the table would kind of freeze and then slam something down. But obviously, like just the rhythm of that moment to the music, like it really worked very well. And to me, like that actually did say something about the character,
Sure.
I got a sense of like what she was thinking and going through, and it externalized that for me. So like that was kind of a fun sequence. And it's sort of symbolic of like how the musical sequences sometimes are really good in the sense of like, the lawyer character, not Emilia Perez, but the lawyer character is
Yeah.
kind of walking through this world, and you get a sense of like what she wants and what she's seeing and the sort of pressures of her culture a little bit. So that was a great use of editing technique in my sense and music to make that work. So two thumbs up for that stuff. And again, I can see why it was nominated because of seeing sort of some of the pyrotechnics of that stuff.
No, it was editing exclamation point in some parts,
Hmm.
and that's cool.
Hmm.
It's like to have like the modern day musical and have those sequences like that sequence. It's exciting. It's like interesting. It's different. It stands out.
So yeah, so there's some great technique in here. It's just again, it's hard. It's hard when you watch a movie, and if it doesn't hit home for you,
No,
you're
that's
gonna
the
start
thing. It's
wondering
just
like
like,
what was missing, and it's hard not
yeah,
to say like it could have been something different.
yeah. And Skid has an opinion of this movie
Yeah, what do
too,
you think,
but
Skid?
Yeah, this movie's garbage, and there's always a film that like, oh, maybe I didn't like the
there's
film, but we
always a
like
film.
that I like the techniques and stuff in it, and I appreciate what you're
Sure.
pointing out in its favor, and it's not to take anything away from Juliet, but this project is misconceived and should not exist, much less be getting this much attention. So it makes me sad,
It's a head scratcher,
but
you know, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I had to start reading
I
up
have
right.
friends who loved it, like got swept up in the whole thing, like not a problem. And I was like, good for you. And that says something. It's just like, getting swept up in the whole thing.
I just think there's no way you can edit your way out of what's offensive
No.
to Mexican
A
culture
group, yeah,
and
Mexican
to
culture,
the
trans
transgender
people, and like,
experience. So
yeah,
that's,
like, no,
it doesn't matter how well you do. At some point, you got to take
yeah.
responsibility for the
It's like,
material.
what was that?
That's
Like, just,
Yeah, why?
yeah,
I mean, that was I kept I'm
why?
like, why?
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 That's
Why?
what I kept saying.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Why is
Why?
this here? Why is this set here? Why is this main character a drug lord? Like I don't know. I was like, boy, I really, really wish they would just stayed in France and like looked at the mob in France. Like there's something
Like, there's so
more
many better
grounded that would have
stories.
been good. Yeah.
Europe is not a wasteland of stories. It is not devoid of stories.
If
Yeah.
only they had
Why?
set the whole thing in France, might have saved the whole project.
It would have been a different
It would have been
attempt.
great.
I mean, they
Yeah.
didn't even get a boondoggle out of it. They didn't even go to Mexico. They didn't even get to make the
They
trip.
didn't even
Why?
go to Mexico.
Mexico.
All right.
Why? Yeah.
Well,
Why?
let's talk about our next film. I wonder if they got to take a trip to Oz. That would be Wicked, edited by Myron Kirstein.
Fun. You know,
Well, yeah.
movie is massive. It's like, if Emilia Perez is like the punishment for liking musicals, this is like the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and two snacks of like loving a musical. It was like, this is the whole package. And I was not disappointed in the slightest. It was, if you're a fan of that musical, there's like, it was pretty great.
Again, I mean, it's so interesting. Like there's micro work, like
Yeah.
scene to scene work, and then there's the bigger picture of like what does this movie add up to and what does it mean? This was like obviously I think it's probably the most popular movie of the movies that we're talking about, but it's also pretty long. I looked again, it's 2 hours,
It's
40
very
minutes long,
long. Yeah.
and it felt long, right, to me.
And it's not finished.
It's only part one, right? So it's half.
Yeah.
And I've seen the musical on stage, and I'm a big fan of it. Like the music's amazing. It's a great story. It's very clever.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I was like, wait a second. How did the first part of this get to be 2 hours and 40 minutes long? And I'm a little bit befuddled because I felt like the musical sequences were so good. I mean, the technical challenge of this thing, it's a huge movie and it lives up to that.
So many people, like
Yeah,
the scope.
the scope exactly. And from an editing point of view, like clearly the editor knows how to tell like that aspect of it, how to show it to its maximum effect, and it's really entertaining. But I think I felt this even as I was watching the movie, and I did see it in the theater, but like somewhere in the middle, it just kind of got long. And
Yeah.
it's like almost like somehow there was so much time spent on the technical challenges, on the musical numbers, that just
No,
some,
it's when the cheesy prince shows up.
yeah,
The
just too
cheesy guy
much.
shows up. It's too much.
Yeah. So that was frustrating to me. I have to say, like, yeah, it's like you want to love everything because it's just technically so amazing, but again, the story that it's telling at the end of the day, even though I love this play, just it got too big to me. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, they spent too much time with like the good-looking guy and oh, he's yeah.
Yeah, for a movie about like a green witch in the mythical world of Oz, boy, it really did sort of stick to like traditional like techniques at times, and it's kind of a funny thing.
I know. But I did enjoy it. I mean,
Yeah, I did too.
it did not disappoint. It was just like what you wanted from a movie like this. And it was just like it was always so curious to me because in the early part of the year, you would go to the see the trailers and it wasn't a musical. Like the marketing of like these films now that like are musicals aren't like Mean Girls was one. Like, is this a remake of Mean Girls or is this Mean Girls a musical from Broadway? And you show up and it's like their songs. But it's like at least with Wicked, you knew there were songs, but where are the songs in the trailer? And I even talked to Myron about that. He's like, I don't understand. You know,
Wow.
I was like, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. Like, can't you just show something of some people singing? It was like, it was a movie about two friends. It was like,
Which it is. It's just
which
they
it
do it through
is. It's
music.
like about
Yeah.
their friendship. And it's like, hey, tell me the story about how you were friends with the Wicked Witch.
Yeah.
But like by the time you got to Oz, and it all pays off, and you're just like, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. I mean, that whole defying gravity sequence is pretty
Oh my
amazing, right?
God.
I mean,
Oh my
who doesn't like
God.
flying monkeys? I mean, come on.
It was
It's
so
good stuff.
great. And just
Yeah.
like, but like really, well, also if you've read the book, like my wife was just like, but in the book, the animals were more part of like the culture of
Mm,
of Oz,
mm.
and they weren't just like the nannies, and they were everything, and you miss kind of that, and you're just like, yeah, because CGI costs $1 million per,
Yeah. For animated animal that
it's like
talks.
you
Yeah.
count have to count
Right.
like
Yeah, it's
20.
funny. I was gonna say, like, I wish there was more time with the animals and less with the silly prince, but I get why those choices get made. Yeah.
But these are the choices, and he was such a caricature that like
Hmm.
that bogged that down, and and that's how things end up feeling long and stuff. But like I get it, it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Especially something this big. I mean, there's so
I
many
know.
pushes and pulls and influences. It's not like they can just kind of do whatever they want. Like there's, you need the male lead in here somewhere to counterbalance your two female leads, and there's all sorts of marketing stuff. We
There's
talked
a
about the
love
marketing department.
triangle. There's
Yeah.
this. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's
And you're trying to serve the like, original material, which, I don't know how big that audience is, but I certainly loved it and many
it's
people
big.
do. So, yeah. So, good. Deservedly so. So,
Deservedly so.
mhm.
It's just like it's still playing on Broadway.
Yeah, and they really did those musical numbers well. Like that. I mean, it is what if you like the play,
Yeah.
the musical in the theater, you're going to like this movie because they really
Yeah.
spent so much care in those sections.
I do want to take an opportunity here to plug the podcast. If you are a fan of the movie, I think you will very much enjoy an episode we did last season 21, episode 7, where Myron joined me along with Chris Scott, who was the choreographer. It was a fun episode, and if you're a fan of the movie, I think you'll enjoy that as well. Here ends the plug. Any additional 2024 films you want to suggest might have deserved a nod for editing?
There weren't like there were a lot of movies that I liked. Like there weren't just a lot of movies that I loved. Like I really liked that movie, My Old Ass. I loved that movie. It was very sweet. And the Eno documentary, that really blew me away because every time you saw it, it was different. You know, it was a whole AI thing.
Mm.
Um, that was really cool. But a lot of things were just kind of like, eh. It was a weird year.
It was a very
It was
strange
the
year.
post-strike year, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
The one that stood out for me that was missing here is Dune 2. And maybe because I'm a sci-fi fan.
But I've forgotten about Dune 2, but like Dune 2
Yeah.
was really good.
It was really well edited. Yeah, it was a good movie. Yeah.
Like, yeah, that was one of my nominees, and I was very shocked
Okay.
that like
Yeah, I
Emilia
was shocked too.
Perez
I was like,
like
yeah,
got its place.
exactly. How
Like
did that not
what?
get nominated? Very strange.
Yeah, Dune 2 was awesome.
And I looked at the Eddies, so that, the American cinema editors, like the society of like the top editors, they have their own awards ceremony, and they haven't announced the winners yet, but they did do the
No, because
nominations
we got it pushed because of
because
the
of
fires. Yeah.
fires, yeah, everything so disrupted here in LA, which is adding to the weird year. But I noticed, like, I mean, they have a drama and a comedy category, which is always weird. I don't
Hmm.
I don't love that, but they did not even nominate The Brutalist at all, which I find kind of shocking. They did
Not in the
nominate Dune
comedy
2.
category. It didn't make the
No,
comedy
not
list.
nothing. It's just,
No, I know it was weird.
they did nominate The Substance as a comedy. So go figure. I guess it was kind of tongue in cheeky. It got pretty bloody
It's a
towards the
fable.
end. Yeah, Fable. I was worried that was going to get nominated because it's very flashy as an editing movie, but I again didn't think like the tone of that one held together. So
No.
I'm glad in a sense I didn't get nominated. And then the one that also seemed to get nominated was Civil War, which I have not seen, but
Yes,
I have to add that to my list.
it was action packed, and you know,
Did it deserve to be nominated for editing, or is
I don't remember.
okay? I'm curious now.
Sadly, no, it was it was a kind of scary story. I just didn't think of it as like best editing.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like it took the place to be at the Brutalist. I'm just curious
Yeah,
why that one got there. So it's interesting. It's again like the politics of these things, and who knows whom. There's a lot
but
that
Anora
doesn't.
got nominated too.
It did. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, Anora's definitely it's definitely one of the more fun movies of the year. So like, that's again, it's such a kind of tough time, with so much going on. Like I can see why people might really enjoy that, and it sticks with some people more than others.
yeah.
Well, I think we can state in summary, it's been an odd year. But on that note, we'll call it a wrap. I think you guys summed it up. Shoot and score, always lively with you guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us as always.
So much fun. I look forward to this every year. It's a great, I get to talk to friends about these movies. I get to go see the movies, and it really makes me like analyze them in a whole new way. So
No,
very fun.
it's always fun. It's always a good time.
Me too. The number of this year's available Oscar episodes is now in the double digits, and the ceremony is just over a week away. I hope you're keeping up. I've got at least 2 episodes in the edit queue, and while we're aiming for a 13th episode, it looks like that one might not come together. Subscribe now if you haven't already so you don't miss what we have to share. As always, I appreciate your feedback. Find my contact info on our website, belowtheline.biz. That's V-I-Z. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.